Welcome back to another episode of Foolproof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I am your host. It's a great day to be here with you. We are going to talk with Zach Garris, author of Honor Thy Fathers. Great topic. We're going to get into a lot of practical advice for men and families and churches on how to obey the fifth commandment and what that looks like. Zach's book is a wonderful resource. You can find it in the show notes. We're going to have a great conversation. Before we do that, I want to make sure you know about the Patreon. You can go sign up on the Patreon in the show notes. It's a great way to support the show. I need your support. It's indispensable to me bringing conversations to you. I have a great time on the show. I would keep doing it for free, but I need your help to keep going. Signing up on the Patreon gets you early access to every episode, and you get some swag if you sign up at $5 or $15 a month. So head over to the show notes, sign up on the Patreon today. You can interact with me. Lots of great stuff going on there. Sign up on the Patreon, support the show. Let's get into today's conversation with Zach Garris, your host. It's good to be with you here this morning. We're recording on Mountain Time with a friend in Mountain Time Zone, Zachary Garris, on his book, Honor Thy Fathers. Zach, thanks so much for being here today.
Glad to be here.
Like I said, it's fun, always fun to have somebody who I don't have to coordinate 2 hours apart. I've had so many guests that have shown up at the wrong time. Even when I have people up in the Pacific Northwest, those time zones get weird. But you're down in New Mexico. You're a pastor there. Wrote this book, Honor Thy Fathers. My first question, I ask this to most of my guests, but I always find it interesting. What really inspired you to write this book? You wrote Masculine Christianity, which we've talked about on the podcast before. If I can be honest, when I saw this, I thought it was going to be a condensed version of Masculine Christianity. And then I read it and I was like, oh, no. This is actually like ressourcement. The Masculine Christianity was more exegetical. Then you're doing this one. What inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, well, I think this book is somewhat complementary to Masculine Christianity in that it's more of a historical angle. So, Masculine Christianity has some of that. I quote Calvin and some other guys in there, but I wanted to do a little deeper dive into the historical theology. And so it's a different argument. I think in some ways it's even more effective for some people because it's showing here's what the tradition held. The scriptural arguments I made in Masculine Christianity were not novel or something different. It's really I was just defending the traditional views, and so I think that's a pretty powerful argument. As you go look back and these guys pretty much all said the same thing, some slight variation. Maybe there's something wrong with some of the novel interpretations of egalitarianism or more narrow complementarian views.
Yeah, has there been a critical engagement? I know when I wrote my book as an author, you're hoping for both, you're hoping it sells well, people enjoy it, but you're also hoping for people to help you sharpen as a thinker. Has there been any kind of critical engagement, any feedback of people, have you been labeled as a misogynist on Reddit yet? Like what is the critical response been to the book so far?
Yeah, I haven't received a whole lot of criticism other than, I don't know, with Masculine Christianity, there's some 1-star reviews on Amazon or whatever. This book, not so much, pretty positive feedback. I wouldn't mind if some critics would engage. I think maybe part of it is they don't read the works closely, or they don't have counter arguments. They don't really know what to do with it. I'd like to think it's a pretty strong argument in that it's, hey, here's the entire Reformed tradition. You can differ, but at least admit you're not following the Reform and you're something outside of it. So, it's not even just a biblical argument. So I don't know how they really get around it. They might disagree with some of the exegesis and say, well, actually, it's okay. We have some newer views, some modified views. But who wants to come out like in the Reformed world and say, actually, I think the whole Reformed tradition was wrong on these points? That's not really a popular way to go. So.
Yeah, it is funny though. It is very common that you highlight this in the book. It's very common today. In fact, most of the water we swim in evangelicalism today is egalitarianism, if not what you call narrow complementarianism. It would be funny, to airdrop like this, like a leaflet over Denver Seminary where I went, and just watch heads explode, because there it's very egalitarian and they claim to be theologically sound and all this kind of stuff. But as soon as you get into this stuff, people, jump ship left and right. And so it's very common today. Most visitors to churches I've seen in our area have been tacitly egalitarian, if not feminist. And so we're like the only church in the area where we're very, we try to be very strong on this. One guy was asking us yesterday, he's like, it's crazy that y'all planted a church in Boulder and it's working. I'm like, yeah, but like, if you're looking for a certain type of church, like if you wanted to go to Zach Garris's church, we're the closest you've got. And we're not even that hardcore. We're not Zach Garris writing books about the patriarchy and father rule. But like we're the closest you got in the area, but it's so hard to train. Like we're seeing a whole generation of evangelicals in America that are inundated with, church plants and pastors and wives who you go to their website, it's husband, wife, we planted this church, we lead this church. And to help people kind of come along out of that has been very challenging. One of the things that often comes up is because so much of the, like you highlight, the publishing industry, the evangelical publishing industry is you know, has this problem all throughout it and all their books, most of their books. And so, evangelicals hold the Bible typically very highly. They believe in inerrancy and the inspiration of the text and all this kind of stuff. And so there's almost this wooden biblicism that they approach the text with, but they've unknowingly adopted a lot of the culture around them from Crossway and all this stuff. And then when you introduce kind of old dead guys, they kind of go like shrug their shoulders like, yeah, well, that was then, this is now. So like how can we trust kind of these quotes and this ressourcement project from old dead guys? Why should we give them kind of credence? I mean, I understand why, but I'd love to hear you articulate why should we give them kind of a credence to speak into what we're talking about today?
Well, I think one thing to point out is no one does that consistently because you would become a heretic. If you were to say, well, who cares what old dead guys said about the Trinity, and debates over Arianism and creeds that were developed, what Augustine said, or later thinkers, we just don't do that. So actually, we all care about what older dead guys said, and I think it's just the fact that there's an inconsistency here regarding the Trinity, justification, some of these like doctrines related to God and like salvation, soteriology. But we're often like more practical stuff, so they think in one sense it doesn't matter. But yeah, so I would just say, well, that's not true. We don't do that with other things, and so we should care what the church said, especially when the church was as I would say here, unanimous. I mean, the church was unanimously patriarchal. They held to male rule. Maybe there's some differences you can find, but nobody was taking egalitarian positions. So that should matter. Even the confessional documents they wrote, they assume male rule and leadership. And I kind of argue that with like the Westminster Standards is. They have a variety of documents, but including even like the Westminster Larger Catechism, the Fifth Commandment stuff, it's just assuming male headship. And so they're going to cite some verses about wives submitting to their husbands and things like that. And they put those in the proof text. So that would probably be one of my main strategies is like just showing the inconsistency. I mean, with a lot of younger guys, especially, they're reading these older works. And so, sometimes that's a little easier. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, even a older Christian man, I mean, they usually have some esteem for John Calvin and guys like that. So they may not know all the other names, but I think we can just kind of help educate them and at least ask, hey, if all these guys agreed on these things, do you think there's something wrong today? Are we just totally influenced by feminism where we're missing things? And I don't know, just ask some questions like that. I mean, we may not persuade them, but I think we have pretty strong biblical and historical arguments.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of gets into the next question too I wanted to ask, which is, a lot of older generations, what they've been kind of inundated with feminism. It's kind of the soup of the day in America and in the Western world. And so a lot of older generations, when you talk to them about patriarchy or something like that, they immediately just like freak out or they can't hear you. You might have a father that was a good dad, provided for you, but kind of boomerish, not really doesn't really care about leaving an inheritance, doesn't really care about grandkids, just trying to retire and move on with their life. And now you've got a life and good luck, God bless. So, how do you help bring these guys along, whether as a pastor or what's been some of your experience in talking to maybe older generations that haven't thought this way?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have an easy solution there. Um, Other than kind of what we're talking about is, I think it's important to emphasize tradition, and and what happens when you abandon tradition, which is kind of what we're seeing in the church today. I mean, just American culture in general is we're throwing off all of our forefathers, and we're just going down, I think, a very dark path where we think we can just reinvent the wheel. We'll start from scratch. We're not going to accept anybody before, I don't know, 1970 or something. And and really, all that leads to is liberalism and apostasy, and also, I mean, even if you want to talk politically and culturally, all sorts of other problems there. And so, I think it's good to appeal to tradition. I think there is some instincts in people to honor tradition. I mean, I would even argue we could argue theologically with them. This is part of the fifth commandment, and even the title of the book is "Honor thy fathers." I mean, it's a broad application of the fifth commandment to honor your father and mother. Is actually, we should esteem and honor. It doesn't mean we can't criticize or differ or whatever, but we should actually value prior generations, and that would include even those in the Bible, but also after that, especially like the men who built our society. I think that's part of it. But when we're thinking, particularly as the church, we're thinking of Christian thinkers and pastors and theologians who went before us, and all the books we have on our shelves, commentaries and systematic theologies and all these things, they were all built on the prior generation. So I just think, as a decent human being and a reasonable Christian, you should honor thy fathers and look to the past. Um, that's basically what you think of, like the idea of education. I realize education's kind of become corrupted in a lot of ways, but classical education, or just the older styles of education, it was always being conversant with older thinkers. That's what it means to be educated. Is you're able to learn from the past, and you might differ on some things. That's fine, but you're at least conversant. And a lot of times, people just today aren't even conversant. They don't even know what people used to say, or held on a variety of things. And so, yeah, I don't know if that's helpful, but that's just some thoughts there.
No, that's great. I wanted to ask, and you can tell me this is too personal of a question if you want, but I did want to ask a follow-up question about, relating to prior generations, relating to your father. I wanted to ask about your own relationship with your own father. What was this? I mean, did you just come out of the womb and you were just, I'm a patriarchalist, my father's a patriarchalist, just everyone, like what, not only just conceptually with your dad, but like, what was your relationship with your dad like growing up?
Yeah, well, so this is interesting. My father is not really a practicing Christian. I grew up in a Greek Orthodox church, and that was kind of my background. So, I mean, what's funny is, with the Greek Orthodox, they have a pretty high esteem for tradition, even some traditions I would not embrace. So, I think maybe I just kind of always had that influence on me. Um, but I mean, that does raise challenges when your own parents, or particularly your father, is not a believer. And so I think a lot of my views came more from just things I read, and then church. I went to the Orthodox Church some. I was involved there when I was young, and then eventually became a Protestant, and got into Reformed theology in college. So, yeah, I mean, I think some of it is, I mean, no matter what, you're gonna be influenced by your parents. You can't help that, for better or worse. I mean, they instill good things in us, generally. So, um, but as you grow older, you might deviate some from what your parents taught you, or just the lack of teaching religiously or otherwise. And so, I think God does these things, right? He works in us, and gives us other influences. Our parents aren't our only influence, and so, um, like, it's good to have mentors, Christian mentors. We need men and women to do more of that kind of thing in the church. But also, I mean, we have books, Books are great mentors. I started reading as a teenager, and in college, I really started getting into like Christian literature, and then just basically became a theology nerd, and and that never really stopped. So I mean, I love history too. That's theology, history, but I'll read whatever. Um, but yeah, I think that's how we have to do things as books. I mean, we have to be wise in what we read too. Not everything's beneficial, but we have so many great influences, and that's why, like, I think the fifth commandment, more broadly construed, is important. Is we have spiritual fathers in the church, our elders, pastors, but we also have forefathers, as I would say, spiritual forefathers, and all sorts of wisdom. I mean, just the wisdom when you go read the Reformed theologians. It's just a treasure trove, and I think we should praise God with. Yeah, there's problems with modern publishing, of course, but there's also some really good publishing going on where they're reprinting or doing new sets of some of these old guys that would have been just not very accessible years ago. I mean, I don't know. Right now, I can go on the internet, and there's the different websites that the University of Michigan has that one website, QuoteLib, and yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm reading Googe on there and Watson. I don't know, whoever you can find. So I mean, we really don't have any excuse today as far as access. It's more, are we going to take advantage of what's out there? I mean, maybe the challenge is actually there's too much stuff and you don't know what to read. So that's where, I mean, we can try to help people, guide them as to what to read.
Sure, that's great. I think I experience a lot as a pastor. We kind of live in a psychological. A lot of people in the evangelical church have adopted a psychological framework over Christian discipleship and formation, such that the way they interpret their life and their own story becomes laden with psychobabble about, you know, all sorts of theories on family systems, and we'll throw around the word abuse like it's nothing. Um, and so, sometimes it can be hard, especially when you're trying to disciple people and pastor people, when they come from either a broken home or a father who abandoned the family. And then you tell them you should honor your father. That becomes kind of a rub for some people because they're like, how would I do that? That's a bad man. How might you help somebody, embrace and obey the fifth commandment who has that kind of experience in life?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. But I think one thing to say is every father is still sins. I mean, as you could have the best Christian father in the world, and he still has his sins and his failures, and but you still have to honor him. And so I think we need to just start from there. As God commands you to honor your father and your mother because of the position they hold, right? They brought you into this world, right? And so they deserve respect and honor. Now, I mean, obviously that changes. I think you read Ephesians 6 and it says, "Children, obey your parents." I think it's referring to young children. As you get older, you're out of the household. Your parents don't have the same level of authority over you, but you're still to always honor them, and that would include things like if they're older and they can't take care of themselves, right? These are old principles, but they're in like 1 Timothy 5. We have duties to care for them and help them. Paul says if you don't do that, you're worse than an unbeliever. So, I mean, it's just kind of expected that you're going to care for your parents. Now, I mean, there obviously are still different levels of sin, and there are fathers who have done horrible things, things that would actually qualify as abuse, physical, sexual, otherwise. And I mean, that's just hard. There's no easy way to approach that. I think we have to take those things to God um, and ask Him to help us. And also, we need to cultivate a forgiving heart. I realize reconciliation may not happen if the parent or father is unrepentant. And so some of that depends on the situation. Some of it may require trying to talk with your father and tell him, maybe confront him, rebuke him over some things. Try to do it as gently as possible. And who knows? I mean, maybe who knows what the Lord will bring from there. But obviously, you should pray for him. Pray for repentance, conversion, and pray for your own heart that the Lord would help you cultivate forgiveness. And I think God does answer those things. He works in those things. And so, yeah, I mean, honoring parents doesn't mean we think of them more highly than we should. I mean, you can. I think there's a way. I'm not sure I can parse this out easily, but there's a way to honor your father even while recognizing some of his significant failures.
Yeah, and I think the way I've tried to articulate is like differentiate between why we're doing the honoring and what we're honoring. So, because we live in a pretty flat egalitarian age where there is no hierarchy, or at least hierarchy is kind of spurned, and most movies are inundated with kind of overthrowing hierarchy, what we're doing when we honor our fathers is honoring the office, if we could put it that way, honoring the position, and not so much necessarily idolizing the person as if they're, right up there in the Trinity with God. It's not as if we're over, like you said, over idealizing the man or anything like that. It's more just, hey, this is a position, and it's a significant one. It's a natural one. It's one that God, you didn't choose. I mean, it's baked into the world, and so there's a way to honor that position, that rule, that reality in your life, without giving into either kind of like worship of one's father or also a spurning of one father, which is most common in our day, where we disrespect. There's been great debates online about, can we even use the word boomer, which we don't need to get into, but like people are really trying to figure this stuff out, is my point. Is like, we're trying to figure out, how do we honor the people that came before us, or just our own personal fathers who, either we feel let us down. How do we honor the rule of that position in our lives without giving ourselves over to idolatry? So one thing I've found common is that, I don't know if you get these messages. I get messages from guys all the time where they're talking about how they're reading this stuff, whether they became, full blown, like we're trying to walk them back from the ledge of Andrew Tate, or they've read like Aaron Wren and Zach Garris on other masculine stuff, and they're married. And when they got married, they were not in a marriage that was built this way. They kind of adopted certain mannerisms and ways of behaving with their wives, and their wife is not reading this literature, but they're like, in bed, kind of like, yeah, don't worry about this book. It's all good, and like they're becoming very like what people would call based and patriarchal in their own heart. And they're trying to help, they want to lead their wife well in it. What kind of wisdom might you offer to guys that are trying to do that well? Because it could go off the rails pretty quick. The man could be filled with resentment, which would be sinful, or bitterness, which would be sinful again, or just wants to do so prudently. Because when you're teaching on this stuff, when you're trying to lead your family, it can be really difficult, especially if you have like decades or just several years even of kind of, whether you like it or not, whether you're complementarian on paper, most people operate very egalitarian. So how would you advise a young man or a married man who's coming to terms with that, and how would you advise him to lead his wife in that?
Yeah, this is definitely a problem today because obviously, I've kind of said this elsewhere, is we're all feminists in a sense. We've just been so influenced by feminism that this is the world we're born into, the air we breathe. And I mean, so, Christian men, let's say they adopt more patriarchal views, male headship. And if they're ideally, your wife embraces this stuff before you marry, but even then, women are still going to struggle to, say, submit to their husbands. The Bible recognizes this problem. And it's not a new problem. It's scriptures calling men to lead, but you have like First Peter 3 about essentially leading gently with your wife, understanding she's the weaker vessel. But then you have all of the instruction towards Christian wives to submit to your husbands in all things, right? And to cultivate a submissive attitude. Um, but it's a challenge because that's as far as like fallen men and women. I think men tend to be more inclined towards abusing authority, though some can be passive, or we can be passive at times. Um, I mean, women could be too submissive, but that's not too common today. It seems it's more like they're just not submissive. They want to call the shots, and so that becomes a problem. So there's no easy solution here, especially when the culture's the way it is, and including the church, right? The church often isn't teaching on these things. So I do find this to be a big problem. We don't even have laws that protect marriages like they should. We don't have churches um, getting involved as they should. So some of this needs to start with churches preaching on these things. And so I think that's maybe an important thing is the man of the household is you're trying to go to a church where the pastors, and I realize this isn't always easy to do, but the pastors actually embrace the scriptural teaching on male headship, and they're teaching it from the pulpit when sometimes it's not going to come up all the time, but then in counseling that they're also going to embrace these things, because that's something I fear is, and I hear a lot of these cases, and maybe you have as well, Chase, is you're having a lot of women even in the church, and they're like really just not submitting to their husbands, and they complain about something, and often the stuff's even leading to divorce, and then the church doesn't do what they're supposed to do, which is supposed to counsel the couple and tell the wife, actually, you can't do that, you're in the wrong. And even if you don't like everything about your husband, you still need to, submit to him, unless he's coercing you to sin or something. Then you don't do that. But so this is becoming a big problem, and then the church is essentially enabling divorce, or enabling sin on women's part that they often wouldn't do on a husband's part. I mean, if the husband's being clearly abusive in his authority, they're probably going to, tell him he needs to stop that, maybe even discipline him if he doesn't. And we're just not seeing it, on both ends. And so I think that's a huge, huge problem. It's a problem in the counseling world more broadly, Christian counseling. It's a problem in the church. So maybe a big thing is you need to find a good church. And if that means even moving, honestly, it's probably worth it. If you can take a job elsewhere where you can actually get in a church that's going to embrace biblical male headship, I think it's just that important, that practical. But also, of course, praying for your wife. You've got to, as the man, have to set a godly example, and pray for her, and then you're going to have to even try to do all of this withstanding potential disrespect and failure to submit, and you're trying to work with those things. So it's not easy, and I know there's a lot of men out there struggling. So it's not easy, but also even taking our wives to Scripture in general, and then family worship, and even covering some of these passages. So I think if your wife's a Christian, you should be able to discuss these things, and I mean, it's hard. You have 1 Peter 3, which is directed towards wives they're Christian women whose husbands are not believers. But one problem I found is we don't have the comparable passage for men if their wives aren't believers, or more like this specific situation where the wife is just not submissive. We don't have we have to apply the text we have, and they still help us, of course, but we don't always have the exact situation of 1 Peter 3.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it can be a real challenge, and I appreciate your wisdom there on that, because I think it's a big deal today. I think it's happening a lot, and maybe it could be helpful if you wouldn't mind sharing some of your own story in your marriage. Growing up Orthodox, becoming Reformed in college. I did have one comment on Twitter, just a deviation real quick, about somehow Nathan Brooks believes you left dishes in the sink while at RTS. Is this something, a pattern of yours, leaving dishes in the sink?
No, I think he has it probably backwards. he left a bunch of dishes in the sink, and I probably made some comments to him or something. I think that's what I recall.
That's great. um, but yeah, it is a deviation, but it actually applies. So when you think about your wife and you guys meeting, you're reformed. I'm assuming y'all met when you were younger. Was this something y'all had to grow into? Did you immediately kind of embrace male headship? Did you ever flirt with egalitarianism? What's it been like talking with your wife about these matters, or do you just not talk? You know, one theory out there amongst in men's kind of, whether it's manosphere or just men's stuff more broadly, is like you don't even need to talk to your wife about it. Just be a good man, lead well, and things will fall right into place. And that may be true for many people, but I'd just love to hear some of your story. What's it been like for you? Before we hear from Zach Garris on that question, I want to make sure you know about a great resource that I've used. If you're a guy, you know about the Roman Republic. You think about the Roman Empire, its decline, its demise, its ascendancy. You think about Constantine and how he ruled, became a Christian, and made it a Christian empire. And you want to know how we could avoid that in our country. I don't know if it's possible under God's providence. We are working towards that, but our American empire is in decline. And so it's great to learn lessons from history, and a great way to do that is heading over to Hillsdale College's free online courses. They have 40 free online courses in some of the most important and enduring subjects of our time. You don't just want to be an anon posting quotes online. You want to be a well-read, well-studied individual, a good man in that way. Hillsdale College can equip you for that with their online courses, all available for free. You can check out their course, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic, which will help you understand what happened there, all the things going on, the virtues necessary to preserve a republic, all the good stuff. Head over to hillsdale.edu/proof to enroll. There's no cost. It's easy to get started. hillsdale.edu/proof to register today. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, and make sure you put in proof at the end. That helps them know that you were sent by me to learn about the Roman Republic. So head over to hillsdale.edu/proof to register today. Let's get back into today's conversation with Zach Garris.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe things fall right into place for people, but with the way our culture is, I think feminism, it's just we don't have the support there where it just makes it easier for things to fall into place. So, I mean, with my wife, yeah, I think a lot of it's just been trying to, you know, do my duties and set an example. But there's times where we've discussed things, and you know, obviously, I think you should be if there's something between you and your wife, you guys need to discuss it. I think conversation's good, praying for one another and with one another. Um, but no, my wife's actually read a lot of stuff. I mean, she reads books. She reads a lot of Christian books, which is great. But she's read some of these, you know, Puritan books, including William Googe, the uh, uh, those done by Reformation Heritage. So, um, and she's read my stuff, which is good. So,
That's great.
but yeah, I mean, I think people can embrace the teachings we read. I mean, this even goes for myself. Like, it's one thing to get, you know, have it up in your head. I mean, this is the problem with Christianity in general, a challenge for us. It's just one thing to have it in your head, but it's another thing to internalize it and live it out. And that's hard. That's just, I mean, that's the Christian life. I mean, it's not just male headship and wifely submission, but just everything, you know. Not, we can say, oh yeah, don't be anxious, trust God. But, you know, then you actually have to do that when there's things that bother you and you're anxious over, right? So, so I think in that sense, it probably is just like anything we do is we need to be Bible people. We need to read and meditate on Scripture. We need to speak Scripture to one another, right? The Bible even talks about exhorting one another, singing songs to one another, psalms to one another. So I think we need to do this, live it out, and pray for one another, because it's very easy to fall back into earthly patterns and sins, and yeah. So I just think this is a challenge for everybody today, even those who will say I'm firmly, you know, patriarchal male headship all the way. I mean, you still are going to have your sinful inclinations. So we just have to be on guard, right? Scripture never treats it like, oh yeah, you're good, just take it easy. It's always like, you know, no, you need to constantly be pressing on and fighting for holiness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, It's interesting. You have kind of like two camps. One is like yourself with your wife reading your books and reading old dead guys. And then my wife is uninterested in that. I don't know if she's ever read my book. I'll tell her I wrote an article and she's like, that's nice.
Well, articles is a different thing. My wife doesn't always read those.
Sure. But it can be interesting. So yeah, it's a unique challenge, but like you said, and this part of the reason I wrote my book was not to plug mine. We're trying to promote your work, but this is part of the reason I study this stuff very deeply is how do people change over time? How do you grow as a Christian? How do you obey God's word? And how do you apply that to your life? Because like you said, most Christians tend to just keep it up here, and don't apply it in all areas of their life, which is so important and crucial. In your book, you talk a lot about father rule, which immediately is going to, trigger some people out there just hearing that. But I'd love for you to explain father rule. Obviously, this is a book. If you want to read kind of Zach's argument on father rule from the scriptures, you can go pick up Masculine Christianity. But in this book, you go into kind of like historical stuff on Calvin and others, many of whom I hadn't even heard of, but Vermigli and these people. So what is father rule? How are we to understand it?
Yeah, I think it's leadership, that God designed men in particular to lead. And that would include not only the home, which, many Christians agree with, but the church, and then also the Commonwealth or the civil government. And I think even the family is the model in a sense for both the church and the state. And so that if you understand the church is made up of families, the state's made up of families, then it makes sense you have male headship in the home, and he's a father. I mean, it's not just a man, but normally we can say God grants children in marriage, and so the man is not just a husband, but he's also a father, and so he's caring for those under his authority. I mean, the wife does this too; she's a mother. But there's different duties and different things that the man does as a husband and as a father from his wife. I think he particularly has the responsibility to protect his family, and that would be not just physically, definitely physically, but also spiritually, making decisions. There might be things you need to tell your wife. I really don't think that's a good place for you to go. It's kind of dangerous, and sometimes women don't think as men do about some of these things. So guarding our wives, guarding our children from certain situations. I would say even guarding our children from unbelieving ideologies that would have a negative impact in them. We want to put them in the best position possible to cultivate faith and Christian intellect. So protecting, but also providing. So the man has a duty to provide for his family. He needs to bring in income so he can put food on the table, as we like to say. But that also applies to like even the church, right? I mean, so I think male headship extends out to the church and the state, which is why men should rule in the church and then also ordinarily rule even in the Commonwealth. But you think of the what do pastors do? Pastors and elders. Well, they protect and they provide as well. I mean, they need to protect the sheep against wolves, and they need to provide the word, especially preachers, right? So you can kind of see these connections even between the fatherly role in the household, and also see it in the church. And then I mean, those are spiritual fathers, but I would even speak of, as Thomas Watson does, political fathers, and they're to provide in a sense, maybe those in need. But also, I would say especially protection. That's a big thing that civil officials are supposed to do, the magistrate. Of course, we live in a day and age where that's not being done. We don't have a lot of political fathers, which is a problem. Maybe we have too many political mothers, right? So some bad motherly instincts, or that are going on there that aren't really fit for the civil realm. But there's really just lack of protection. I think that's like a big thing. We're not our magistrates aren't looking out for us. They're not trying to protect us, and that's a big problem. But we don't need to get too much into that. But I think there's a connection there.
Yeah, I think I see that connection very clearly in my mind as well. With the concept of father rule, and you get into it in some of the quotes. I was actually reading that Augustine quote. I believe you mentioned Augustine. And this gets into matters of anthropology. And so I'm curious to kind of pick your brain on it, because most people in our day, I'll see complementarian on paper pastors talk about these matters. And, they're so apologetic. They apologize for the Bible left and right. They're embarrassed. They don't even know what to do with it. You can feel them shaking in their boots when they teach this stuff. And they always kind of default to, their line is men and women are equal. Men and women are equal. And like, they just want to they want to make sure that we're not, violating some kind of sacred kind of principle of equality. When you read Augustine and when you read others, they talk about either the Imago Dei, which in our day that term has become fairly corrupted by a lot of people. It's not uncommon for reformers and others to use that phrase, but today it's just become a short term where people stuff all sorts of ideologies into it. How do we understand father rule and the equality of women in the home, historically and biblically? That's a big one that I'm trying to study and understand more, because I think most people assume hierarchy means inequality. And if you read the reformers, in some ways it does. And so how do you help people kind of understand, like, yeah, we're both, we're people. And you included some great quotes about, pulling whether it's a typological reading or not, the way the woman was formed was out of the
Mm.
side, not to be beneath the man, but to be beside the man. So how do you help people understand this concept of equality in marriage without going full lib and going like into this weird egalitarian feminism, and also not embracing some kind of like as if the wife is an animal, which is honestly how a lot of Greek philosophy teaches and that kind of thing. Like Aristotle has a famous quote about women being deformed men, all this kind of stuff. So how do you help people parse this out? How would you speak to that matter?
Yeah, I think we can affirm uh, both truths, which is that men and women are equal, but we have to explain what that means. But then, in another sense, we would say they're not equal. So that may sound contradictory, but it, it just depends what we mean by it. This is what theologians do. We make distinctions. So when we look at Scripture, I think we can say both men and women are made in God's image, right? Male and female. Um, Although even there, I'll note like Calvin, and I have this in like Masculine Christianity.
I
The
know.
way they'll parse out man's image, especially because Paul gets into this in 1 Corinthians 11, is they'll say that man reflects God's image in a particular way related to his rule. So even there, they're you couldn't really just say, well, image of God, so there we're done, but that doesn't work historically. Um, but I think we can say, and this is how I like to say it, is that men and women are fully made in God's image. They're equal in worth and value. And so, like we're talking about they're fully human, and we owe them duties just as we do any other human. Okay, so there's that part. We need to love them, love your neighbor as yourself. Man or woman is your neighbor. Okay, um, so we have that. That's the equality, but there also are inequalities, and I mean this is true of all humans. It's not just male female. I mean that's maybe the most obvious, but
Male. Yeah.
male are not equal. I think some of this is just such egalitarian, assumptions today are a problem. Is I mean, even the Westminster Larger Catechism speaks of superiors and inferiors, and it's not doing so in worth and value. It's making that distinction for duties and positions of authority. So, for example, a child is not equal to his father. They're not like a 5-year-old. And what do I mean? Well, the father has superior authority, and it was God given, and that's why God says, "Children, obey your parents." Okay, so you have to recognize there's inequality there, um, even between adult men, right? There some hold different positions of authority. It might even be age. The Bible speaks this way. So the Reformed theologians. Larger Catechism speaks of those superior in gifts and age. So, um, they're not your equal. I mean, you owe deference to if you're 40 years old, you owe deference to an 80-year-old. It's biblical. So, and why? Well, they're your superior in age. You're not equal. I mean, okay, but it doesn't mean they're more valuable than you. We're just saying there's inequalities.
Right.
So that same principle is going to apply. Well, you have the magistrate. I mean, that's why the Bible can say that we're to, obey the magistrate, or submit to the magistrate. We're to submit to church authorities, elders. Okay, so you have that, and then you have the same thing in the household. You have husband and wife. Wives submit to your husbands. Scripture, I know the egalitarians go, mutual submission. Let me say this for the record: the Bible never says that husbands should submit to their wives in the same way that a wife should submit to her husband. I mean, there's maybe a sense in which of honoring our wives and that kind of thing, respecting them. But as far as like who holds authority in the marriage relationship, the Bible's very clear: it's the husband. Egalitarian scholarship is just lousy on this. It just is. They'll go to the mutual submission, but they don't then go to, like, I don't know, Colossians 3, where it doesn't say anything about mutual submission. It just says wives submit to your husbands. So it's pretty blatant and obvious. So we need to be able to affirm that. Now there is the problem here is a lot of complementarians have wanted to say the whole thing of that there's equal. They want to say that there's equality, but just submission within equality, and so actually they want to deny kind of the inequalities between men and women. Now, this is one thing I think broader complementarians or patriarchal position especially will argue, is that the differences between men and women are also tied, like wives submitting to husbands. That's also tied with kind of the natural differences between men and women. It's not so the way I would put it, it's not just arbitrary that God tells women to submit, but the way he designed men and women is that it actually works out where the man is supposed to lead and the woman's supposed to submit. And it's tied with just, I don't know, our entire personality, constituency, all these things. So anyway, to sum that up, I think we should easily be able to say that men and women are equal in one sense, but unequal in another sense.
Yeah, and I don't know why that's so hard, but even when you try to distinguish, even as a pastor, it can be difficult for some people to understand. It's really sad, but yeah, I agree with what you're saying completely. Let's get into some of the kind of problems going on today. I mean, obviously you come in from a Presbyterian tradition, so you highlight a lot of things going on in the PCA and the Presbyterian tradition more broadly. One figure you name is Tim Keller, and I've used Keller's works in the past. You highlight his book on vocation, his book on marriage, the meaning of marriage, and Kathy Keller's books. I've read all three of those, and I have my problems with those. But for the listener who may not be familiar with these problems, maybe give them a teaser on what's going on there, like why Keller is very highly esteemed, very popular, not just in the Presbyterian world, but in the evangelical world. What did you notice in there? How is it different than maybe what we're talking about today?
Well, Keller himself didn't write too much on these issues. He has his marriage book that he wrote with his wife. And I do mention, I think there's problems there. They don't really teach male headship much. I mean, they mention it a little bit, but they essentially take the view that I don't think they say mutual submission, not that I recall, but they at least say, well, it's like a tie-breaking vote. So they really minimize the idea of male headship. Whereas I would say, well, the biblical view is that the man is to lead in all things, and that the wife is to submit in all things. So it's part of it's an attitude, but it doesn't mean the husband should go around commanding his wife on every little thing, but that he's supposed to actually lead, and it just doesn't happen just like once a year, or once a month, or whatever, related to which restaurant you're going to go to. I mean, that's always the example, is like, this is so unhelpful, really. I mean,
it's so pedantic.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, in that kind of case, just let your wife pick the restaurant. Who cares? But we're talking about like bigger issues, where are the kids going to go to school? These kind of things, The husband
Yeah.
needs to lead in these ways because that's his God's given him authority, but also responsibility. It's a duty. So anyway, so that's how the Kellers kind of their take on marriage is a very narrow complementarian view of male headship. I mentioned the vocation book, Every Good Endeavor, which has a lot of good stuff in there, but I just note that there's nothing about motherhood. I mean, my wife stays at home. A lot of women stay at home historically and try to today with young kids, and there's nothing in there on motherhood. And I think that's just a huge omission. It just assumes all women are career women, and that's just not the case. So I think that's a problem. And but then Kathy Keller wrote a book called Jesus, Justice, and Gender Roles, and then she was also on this committee in the PCA that did this report on women in the church. And I mean, that should just tell you that the problem with the committee is you've got Kathy Keller on it. I mean, she's not even a elder in the church. I think those committees should be limited to elders. I don't know why they're getting women on them, but regardless, so she helped draft this document, and it was very reflective, especially the application of some of her views. But so Tim Keller didn't write anything particular. I had to go dig up like things he said in audio recordings and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, you can go through my sources. I think I document it pretty well. There's also the whole deaconess thing, where they were commissioning deaconesses at Redeemer in New York, which I criticize that as well. I think the office of deacon is limited to men. Now that one's a little messier historically, but I think I'm right. So. But the biggest probably problem with the Kellers is their whole is Kathy Keller's book Jesus, Justice, and Gender Roles, because that gets into leadership in the church, and especially gets into teaching. And so one thing I'll say is, yeah, Kathy wrote that booklet, but it's very clearly the view of Tim as well. It just doesn't have his name on it, and I have. Like I said, I found other things by him that I think show that this is his view. Of course, why would his wife write a book if that he would disagree with it? That wouldn't make sense, especially on a controversial topic. So essentially, she argues that that only men can be pastors and elders. That's like the Keller position. So it's a narrow complementarian position. But outside of that, it's like basically women can do anything. A woman may do anything a non-ordained man may do. That's their whole shtick. I mean, I think there's a lot of problems with this, but it's led like into the PCA. It's led to things like women reading scripture in public worship, women leading prayers in public worship, and I've seen examples of even worse. I've seen a church that has had this is online, so I saw it. It's the woman was doing the basically the whole service, and then that was Tim Keller's son, Michael Keller. I mean, people can go look this stuff up, and it's in New York Metro. And then actually, the New York Metro Presbytery also got in the last 2 years. There's been this thing. They had a woman preach at a church. And the Presbytery then didn't do anything about it, and then the General Assembly had to step in. So we're actually having problems in the PCA at judicially in New York Metro, and I can guarantee I mean, I don't know how you would deny this. It's New York Metro. Obviously, Tim Keller's influence there was huge, and right. So it's not a surprise that these problems are coming out of there, and. But it's even worse in a sense, and actually this is tied with the women preaching thing, is I'm not aware of Tim Keller ever having a woman preach in his church. I don't think he did, as far as I know. However, the argument, if you go read that Kathy Keller booklet, I don't think there's anything in there that would prevent it, because she's really making this strong distinction between office and task. And so that's why I mean, Tim even said that he allowed women to teach everything, but they're like new members class, essentially. I think they called it like a catechumens class. But he said they were letting women teach like Sunday school. So that would be like theology if they're teaching the Westminster Standards, or even Bible. They're having women teach mixed groups. That's very common practice today, even in the PCA. I'm highly critical of that. I mean, 1 Timothy 2 is not limited to public worship service. There's nothing magical that happens when you get outside the worship service or into the worship service. Oh, where only men can lead or only men can preach, but now a woman can go preach outside of that in a different setting, or she can now teach theology to men in a Sunday school setting. I think that is a false distinction, and I criticize it in a number of ways in my writings. But that really is the narrow complementarian position. I mean, there's variations here, but it's well, we're not going to allow women to hold the office of elder. They might deacon, but when it comes to like practical matters, they might even think a woman can preach under the authority of the session. And so now I obviously think this is biblically wrong, but I also think that practice and those principles absolutely undermine male headship. And I think that's going to continue to happen. I think those churches are going to continue to go more and more in an egalitarian direction. And I think we've seen some of that, and I think that's going to continue to happen.
Yeah, I saw this very common in a network I was formerly affiliated with. This was a very, popular way to talk about it. It did, I will confess, a tear came to my eye when you cited Frame. I love Frame. And I always say all of our theologians, 90% of what they, especially ones you like, 90% of what they say, you can like, but always assume there's 10% that you're going to disagree with. And that's the 10% for me with Frame. One kind of zinger you might get back that's kind of common when I talk about this stuff is, okay, but what about children, women teaching children? So you'll get this in like classical co-ops. You'll get this in churches that have Sunday school for children, and you'll get women teaching boys. And so they like to use this as kind of like a gotcha, like, you're not really truly living out the principle. So how might you respond to that? Like, let's think about, like I said, very, very common with something like classical conversations, which is very popular today, generally good. And you'll have women teaching boys and girls about different matters related to the world and education, but also the faith. How should we think of that?
Well, let's maybe start in the home. And if your wife is not teaching your children, then something's wrong.
Sure.
That's, I think this is just universally accepted, is that both parents teach their children, both through example, but also through, words and instruction. And I think it's important that moms are doing some catechism and things at home. I mean, I think that the husband should lead family worship, but if he's off at work or he's not at the home, then it's good for the mom to do some catechism and Bible memorization and those kind of things, especially with younger kids. So there's nothing wrong with that, and I think that's assumed even texts like Titus 2. And then so you get into like schooling situations. I don't see the problem with women teaching children, particularly young children. And I mean, maybe one problem is with schools. If it's only women teaching, I think that can be a problem. We do need the men to teach, and so it's good to have male teachers and some male involvement in homeschool, even things like that. But when another point to make is when you look at 1 Timothy 2, it's a prohibition on women teaching men. So I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. And then the reasoning is, for Adam was formed first and the woman was deceived. And so people even like to say, well, if women are deceived, then they're not, fit to teach children. And I think, no, it's only, because some men can be deceived. Of course, we can be deceived. It's more of a contrast between men and women, is saying that men are, when it comes to mixed assemblies, if there's men and women in there, then only men are suited for public preaching and teaching. Now, again, though, that doesn't mean all men. It's some men. But it's saying that women are not permitted to do so. So it's a class prohibition. But there's no such prohibition on women teaching boys. Right? So young boys or girls, obviously. So I don't see any problem there. We don't have those kind of prohibitions, and I don't think they have a very strong argument. I mean, it's kind of similar to the argument. Some people will say, well, Priscilla and Aquila, you have Priscilla instructing Apollos, and it's like, well, it says. I mean, first off, it's not very clear what was going on because it says that both of them they took Apollos aside. So we don't know how much Priscilla was actually doing. But even if we assume that she was teaching him some things, that was on an individual basis. It wasn't some sort of group setting or authoritative position. So I mean, these people like to use kind of bring up these potential counterexamples, and I just don't think they're actually good ones.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I don't know how much more time you have. I have one kind of final question if you've got time.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So a popular concept today amongst evangelicals is servant leadership. If you've listened to my podcast, I've talked about this before. It comes up in your section when you write in your book, Zach, on Keller, who embraces kind of servant leadership. And it's one of those horses I can't beat enough. It cannot, I think you put in the front of the book that feminism is fallen on hard times, but it hasn't fallen hard enough or something like that. I feel similarly with servant leadership just as a concept. And I know if you're listening to this and you're like, this is your modus operandi about what it means to follow Jesus, this is going to be really hard to hear because you just assume this is like Bible. It's like in the Greek, servant leadership, always do this, and this is what it means. Just help people come along. What's the problem with the concept of servant leadership as it's been popularized today?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is we as Christians, we know those texts that say, you're supposed to serve others, right? Jesus says, if you want to be the greatest, you become a servant. Actually, even uses the language of slave. You be a slave to your brothers. Okay, but people don't say slave leadership. So yeah,
correct.
So even though it is the Greek word doulos, but so anyway. Yeah, I mean, so people want to read that text though, and that principle, which we would all affirm, that we should serve others. They want to read that into every, hierarchical arrangement, and it's not that there's not truth to it. It's that it's trying to overemphasize something that's not there, and maybe even, well, I think it's definitely trying to soften the actual leadership aspect. So maybe we can draw this out a little bit. Is a husband is to lead his wife, and he is to serve her in that capacity. However, he is not now her servant, as if she can boss him around and tell him to do whatever she wants, as if she's now the head. It doesn't inverse the relationship. He still has the duties to protect and provide and lead. And but what we mean when that he's serving her is he's looking out for her good. Of course, he's not just serving her. He's also serving his children, and he's serving others in his church. So his leadership responsibilities are not only directed towards his wife. It doesn't make her the center of the world, which is often how this kind of thing is portrayed, is be a servant leader. And in other words, just be a doormat and do whatever your wife wants. I mean, that's just not helpful. And I think, so practically there's going to be times where the husband has to make decisions that are going to be hard on the family, that might involve moving, taking another job, going to another church, whatever it is. And the wife may not like it. She may not even agree. And you should try to work things out with your spouse. Obviously, she's your counselor, advisor. But there's going to be times where you just differ, right? You're not going to be in agreement on everything. And servant leadership would seem to say, well, just do what the wife wants, but that's wrong. If you as the man are fully convinced, and you give it time and you're patient, and you have to make that hard decision, and your wife might be unhappy or temporarily unhappy, but you still served her. You're still taking her into your account, but she may not feel like it. And so sometimes the servant leadership thing is just, it's almost equated as if like the whole happy wife, happy life thing is just serve her and make her happy. But that's not what the Bible teaches. So anyway, there's other things, and maybe you have stuff to add there. I think I have some other thoughts in the book, but I just think it's like it's just forcing something on the concept that isn't there.
Yeah, I agree. And you do highlight, and I've tried to highlight this too, is this reciprocal joy, where it assumes that if one party in the marriage is more happy than the other, that person is the Lord, or like you can only serve your wife to the detriment of your own joy, to where she's happy. And it's very unkind. It's very debasing, and it's very unbiblical. I mean, just a practical example this week, it was funny. So I got a recipe from someone else, and it's cookies. I make cookies. I like baking. Baking is like a science. I don't like cooking. Cooking is like an art, and I can grill. And so my wife does most of the cooking, but I like baking. It makes sense, and it's delicious. I have a sweet tooth. And so my wife asked me to make cookies because that would make her happy. And I was like, this too would make me happy. I would like to. So last night I was actually reading your book, and she was like, hey, I remember when I asked you 5 days ago to make cookies, and I was like, oh yeah. So I put down your book and went and baked cookies. It was reciprocal joy. This was a thing I'm happy to do. It makes sense to me. I listen to an audiobook, I bake, my children are happy. I'm happy. My wife is happy. So I think people just hear all these concepts and they read it so woodenly, they don't understand. And under the servant leadership, happy wife, happy life thing, I think it often is debasing to the man, to where it's like, if you want to do something and your wife doesn't want you to do it, you should not do it, like ad nauseum, and keep your wife's happiness. It's almost a worship of the wife, to where her happiness, and this becomes a real problem in marriages where, women are by nature more sensitive, more fragile, more nurturing, all these kind of things. And if that's kind of the way the family operates, and you call it in your book, I think rightly, families are like little seminaries, then you broaden that out. And I think that, to me, it's, you don't want to have, kind of an explanation for all things, to where you start reading everything into everything. At the same time, I think this is such a pervasive problem in families, and marriages particularly, that it then broadens out not only into seminaries and churches, where you've got shadow elders operating. The elder takes home a ruling the elder's made. It makes his wife unhappy. And then all of a sudden the email comes in at 1 a.m. Hey, I was thinking about our decision. Or you get it in the political realm as well, where don't upset women at all costs. And I think that's a terrible way to live. I think it's unkind, it's unjust, it's unbiblical, and there's better ways to live. And I think it's not an either or in terms of like, who's going to be unhappy today. It's a relationship. And we should honor the biblical text and how we lead our wives in that way. So yeah, I appreciate what you said there. Thank you for adding to that.
Yeah, I think we could just kind of summarize it as to say, male headship properly exercised is for the good of all, and in that sense, it does serve everyone. And so, but we just, I don't know. Sometimes there's a lot of hard decisions that need to be made in families, the church, the Commonwealth, right? The state especially, and we need men to make them. It might upset some people, some men and women, but you know what? It's just what needs to be done. So
yeah, for sure. All right, Zach. Well, this was a great conversation. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. Where can people pick up a copy of your book?
So the Honor Thy Fathers is available at the New Christendom Press website. I think it's newchristendompress.com. And you can get the hardback. It's still available. I think it's a special edition. I think they're going to go to a softcover at some point, but I think the hardback is it's pretty great. So you probably want to pick up a copy there. The ebook is available on Amazon, but I think it's just the ebook on Amazon right now. So you can get either. I think they're working on an audiobook. I don't know. I don't use those as much, but some people like that kind of thing. So.
That's great. And if people want to keep up with any kind of your ministry or writing elsewhere, is there a website or somewhere on social media they should follow you?
Yeah, I try to put up articles every month or so on knowingscripture.com. Those are generally Bible related. Though I do articles on other things sometimes, for other websites, but probably the best way would just be to follow me on Twitter at Zachary Garris. I try to post things on there and other thoughts and the like. So
that's great. All right, Zach, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Foolproof Theology. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. As always, share the episode with a friend, a family member, maybe your own dad. It could spark great conversations. I hope the questions we asked and the answers we gave were helpful in equipping you to be a better husband, father, pastor, whatever it may be. I wanted to also remind you of a great product that I'm using called Ion Layer. If you haven't bought it yet, you need to buy it today. Ion Layer is going to help you with your mental acuity, your health, your recovery, all that kind of stuff. Ion Layer has adopted a technology that's been used in the medical industry for years. Instead of an IV, you can get a patch which helps your NAD plus levels. You may be asking, what are your NAD plus levels? Well, let me tell you, they're crucial. They're crucial to your body's health. By the time you're 50, your NAD plus levels decline by 50% compared to that in your 20s. And so you need to get those NAD plus levels up to help with your recovery, your intellect, all that good stuff. You can head over to ionlayer.com, enter code FPT. That gets you $100 off your first kit. These kits are extremely affordable compared to IV drips, which are thousands of dollars. Head over to ionlayer.com, use code FPT, and you'll get $100 off your first kit. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and so if it doesn't work out for you, like it has for me, that would be unfortunate. But you can get all your money back within the first 30 days. Just go over ionlayer.com, use code FPT to get $100 off your first kit. Thanks for tuning in today. We'll see you next time.